have you considered, if you do start this sort of beekeeping lark, have you thought about where you might put your hive at home?
I've got a couple of places in mind, and when I've seen hives around, they tend to be next to a hedge or under trees and not too close to people.
Yeah, it's very important where you put your hive. I mean, first and foremost, you've got to look at the bees, where in terms of getting them up in the morning, you want them out early and quick. So a lot of hives tend to be kind of south or southeasterly facing.
Okay.
Sun shines on the entrance, they know it's kind of time to get up, and they're out. So that's the first thing to consider.
I'm thinking about my garden now.
Well, have you got neighbours nearby?
Yeah, either side.
Yeah, I'd consult them as well.
Right.
All right. The other thing you need to think about is your neighbours, because you might have a passion for bees, they might not quite share that same thing. So it's always worth kind of talking to them first, even before you get the bees. Because the worst thing you want is for them to find out you're a beekeeper and then suddenly see bees flying into their garden. It's not what you want.
Right. Okay.
And often kind of get their buying in, kind of very early on, saying, I'm thinking about being a beekeeper, have you got a problem with that? Bribing them with a couple of jars of honey every year, you shouldn't have a problem. But it's worth entertaining that to start with.
So south or southeast facing,
Absolutely.
So they wake up early with the sunshine.
Talk to your neighbours.
Talk to the neighbours.
And the hedge and the tree thing, it's very important in terms of the flight path of the bee. Now, a lot of people kind of think about putting hives in their garden, facing their neighbour's garden, but the key is getting it near a hedge where literally the flight path is interrupted by the hedge. So rather than flying into the hedge, they have to fly up and over, and it puts their flight path high.
Okay, why?
Because it avoids everything. Because a lot of people, if you're putting it right next door to a footpath or that neighbour's garden,
Okay.
if they're flying straight into it, then you've got a problem. If they're flying up and above, because they've got this bee line, they'll follow that path all the time.
Okay.
So fingers crossed.
I thought it was something to do with keeping them warm or something like that, or, stopping the rain from whooshing in or something.
Yeah, there's an element of that as well, because obviously the wind bees do not like wind. If you're checking the bees and suddenly there's this gush of wind coming through, they're not going to like it too much. No. But predominantly it's to do with the flight path. What about the beehives? Have you seen beehives, liked a particular sort?
This is like the quintessential, that's the one I want, even if it's not practical, because it looks pretty, doesn't it?
Yes.
In a garden. I mean, I see those aren't too bad. I would probably be painting them so they look
It's a bit ugly compared to these.
Yeah, these are very nice.
Let me tell you, this is the WBC hive, and this is the
WBC.
quintessential William Broughton Carr.
Right.
It's the man who designed it.
Okay.
And he patented it, get this, in 1890. It's a long old time ago. But this is what people think of a beehive,
yes.
I think. They see it in a kind of pictures in the magazines and all this lot. It's not widely used now, I have to say, in favour of the really ugly ones. It's not really practical.
Oh, okay.
I mean, they're lovely and they're beautiful, and I have to say, if you want it in your garden and you're only wanting one or two, WBCs are perfectly fine.
Okay.
They look nice, they're a talking point, but working with them can be quite difficult, because basically what you're seeing here, this beautiful outside shell, you have to take it off in order to get to that.
Right.
Because if you can imagine, this is the shell, what you've got over there is inside of this, so you're lifting off the lid,
lifting off the
next shell,
just to get to that.
Yeah.
So if you're doing loads, you would go with those.
Exactly. So hobbyist beekeepers, 1, 2, 3, 4 colonies in your garden, perfect. Anything more than that, and I have to say the most widely used hive in the UK is the National, which is what that is called.
And why? Is it just because of the ease of use?
It's functional.
Right.
It's just functional. Ostensibly, they're exactly the same hive, but with more in them. But you get these, and there are variations of that as well. The National hive is the most commonly used, but on this hive in particular, for example, you can see the very bottom box in there is where the queen is laying her eggs. Mm-hmm. But with a new strain of bees coming into the UK with very, very prolific layers, it's not enough.
It's not big enough.
It's not big enough. So we're finding that a lot of people are moving from a smaller box like that to a much larger box to allow the queen to lay a little bit more.
And I presume garden size has no influence at all?
No, not necessarily.
Because they fly where they want.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember, bees can fly for more than 3 miles if they wanted to. I mean, bees are particularly lazy, so if there's a really nice nectar or pollen source nearby, they'll go to it. But if it's not there, and this is what you find in the countryside, when there's monoculture crops in a field, they'll fly past that for sometimes more than 3 miles away.
So in an urban area, and it's just gardens and there's no orchards, that's not a problem either.
Not at all. In actual fact, London honey is prolific because of all the different sorts of flowers. Right. Bees like variation, hence why London honey is very good. But interestingly, for London, for example, a lot of beekeepers don't necessarily stick with these sorts of things.
Oh, okay. What
they
do
tend to go for much more modern. hives. I don't know
Which
if-
are?
Well, you've got what they call a bee house or a bee house, which it was actually designed in 2009. So it's a
Very new.
very modern. It's one of the ones that I use. It's not really particularly liked because, I mean, if you've got this being particularly traditional, that's particularly modern. And so you've got real two classes of thought there. So, I mean, there's positives and negatives for every different sort of hive that you can
So
have.
ease of maintenance and stuff like that. It varies for each one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Swings and roundabouts.
It is a little bit. The bee house, for example, which is what I use, it's particularly difficult in terms of disease maintenance. Now, with hives nowadays, you are having to working with the bees, but working with disease. With wooden hives, for example, at the end of the season, you're getting a flamethrower. It's quite fun.
No wonder boys like doing this, yeah?
Yeah. I don't tell the wife about this, but you get the flamethrower, and literally you get the wooden hive, and you're flaming it down.
So you're just charring it to get rid of any disease.
All the wax and the wax moth and everything like that, which could be there, is flamed off completely.
Right.
With a plastic hive, you can't
really do that.
really do that. It doesn't
But
really
then
work
with
very
a
well.
plastic one, you must be able to wash it down with
It's like a bleach
detergent or
substance,
something,
so-
bleach, yeah.
washing sodas and things like
Chlorine
that. But
and
you've got to manage it. It's quite difficult
Right.
to do it. But I mean, there are so many different sorts of hive. That's the fun bit about beekeeping. I mean, we're talking about the national being the most used in the UK, but actually 75% of the world's beehives are what they call Langstroth hives. Now, the Langstroth is the most popular hive in the whole world.
Right, so how is it different from the national?
Well, the national is a square hive.
Yep.
The Langstroth is a much narrower, but longer hive. So, I mean, you're still getting about kind of 10 to 11 frames within it, but it's just longer. After Reverend Langstroth developed it in the 1860s, it was the first movable framed hive.
Right.
Hence its popularity from America. All the American beekeepers love it.
Now that's a big choice. I mean, where'd you start?
Yeah, there's quite a few. I mean, only in here we've got a WBC, we have a national, we have a commercial. I mean, then you've got to add on top of that, you have modified nationals, which are the larger ones. You have Smiths, which are mainly used in Scotland, of all places, which is slightly smaller. You have the Langstroth, you have the Dadant, which is very popular in mainland Europe, especially in France.
Right.
I mean, there are tens of different beehives. You've got polystyrene ones as well, of all things. So, I mean, you can take your pick, really.
Pay your money and you make your choice.
Yeah, but different beekeepers have different opinions about every single one of them.
Sounds like gardeners to me.
Yeah. Just go with the ones that everyone else is using near you. It makes your life a hell of a lot simpler.
So you need to check your area out as well as...
Exactly.
Right.
It's the biggest key thing that you can do. But at the end of the day, you know, the WC is lovely.
I think I'll just be on that one, the WBC.
Yeah, well, don't confuse it with compost heaps, because a lot of people have these as compost heaps. So
No.
I wouldn't do that.
Because I'm going to be a hobbyist. I don't think I'm going to be... It's going to be the odd jar to family and friends.
Well, you cannot have a problem with this at the end of your garden. Sitting there in the sun in the evening watching them fly out of this, it's absolutely beautiful.